Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Post-fight reviews for Gurgen Hovhannisyan vs Patrick Mailata and Danier Pero vs Walter Burns, and these fights were on the Jake Paul MVP card, which was in Orlando. So the main portion of the card was on DAZN, and you can find the prelims. Some of it is up on YouTube, and that features the Hovanesian fight actually, which despite Pero being further up the bill, we'll start first with the Hovhannisyan fight because Hovhannisyan didn't have it all his own way, and this was a much more competitive fight potentially than he was expecting. But Patrick Mailata, and we'll come to his record a little bit later, he was always going to be a tough out and make Hovhannisyan work. Coming into this one, you had Hovhannisyan 6-0, and I think many of us remember his very good performance against Michael Polite Coffey in 2022. He looked decent against Colby Madison at the start of this year, but in this one, didn't have it all his own way, and he was eating left hooks for fun. Just could not get the glove up to either block the left hook from Milata or just get out of the way. So what you had was this one ending here in a majority decision, and it was interesting because I was thinking, am I watching a different fight to the commentators who were waxing lyrical about the work Hovhannisyan was doing and only barely acknowledging the work that Milata was doing? And I was seeing a fight where Milata was landing these left hooks early on to the body, that was quite frequent, but he was the one clipping Hovhannisyan multiple times with the left hook. And I think it was round 5 or just before Hovhannisyan was rocked in round 6, the commentators were saying that Milata was just throwing the odd shot and Hovhannisyan was winning all the rounds. And I was like, that's not the fight that I'm seeing. And I'd like to know your thoughts on that, because I had this one ending 4-4. 4 rounds apiece, and I thought that Patrick Mailata, after his big burst in the sixth round where he landed a big left hook and rocked Hovhannisyan, had him ambling around the ring, sort of very reminiscent to Tyson Fury, similar height and build, and with the sort of thinner legs, staggering. And then you had Milata trying to follow up and stop him. And he did land another blow or two, another big left hook came in, that's for sure, just before the bell saved Hovhannisyan. But it was round 7 and 8 that were all Hovhannisyan pretty much in terms of taking those rounds because Milata was spent. And one of the things that hasn't helped Milata, and we'll come to this a little bit later, is the conditioning and the general weight. But I saw right from early on a very competitive back and forth fight. When Hovhannisyan was letting his hands go, throwing in combination and throwing in volume, he did look good, but he would take decent breaks, and he wasn't consistently throwing a lot all through the fight. I thought round 2 was clearly a Hovhannisyan round, but round 1 was, I thought, a Milata round. I mean, it could potentially gone to Hovhannisyan, but what you had was, and there were a couple of rounds like this, it was kind of what did you like? Maybe a little bit more volume from Hovhannisyan, but Milata landing the heavier, more effective shots against Hovhannisyan, to body and head. So it was a little bit of what did you like. So when the judges' scorecards came out and the commentators were like, what were they saying? How did one judge get it 4 rounds apiece? I was just like, well, it was a lot more competitive than the commentators were calling. And the fact the other 2 judges had 3 rounds for Milata. I mean, I was looking at my scorecard going, if Milata hadn't faded so badly in the last couple of rounds, because he really did give it everything after catching up with Hovhannisyan with a big left hook in round 6. And by round 8, he was not almost falling down, but he didn't have a lot left to give. He was falling in and almost leading with the head, trying to catch up and just, land something on Hovhannisyan, who was doing the better, cleaner, effective work in those 2 rounds. And for me, on my card, that's what brought him back level. And there was another round in the fight, earlier in the fight, round 1, like I say, that was close that, I could have swung that to Hovhannisyan. So I can see 4-4 or 5-3 to Hovhannisyan being a completely fair result. So I don't know what the commentators were calling, but I don't think it matched reality. But sometimes these sorts of cards, you do get the hometown fighter gets all the buzz. But yeah, it was a good fight, competitive fight. But the fact that Hovhannisyan was made to look not average, but he didn't shine, he didn't sparkle, he wasn't consistent enough. He was allowing Milata relatively easily to, at times, especially after the first couple of rounds, to collapse the distance. He wasn't able to manage the range that effectively, and obviously eating left hooks so frequently throughout the fight, including big left hooks in round 6. That is a major red flag. And there has been a lot of hype for Hovhannisyan as one of these up-and-coming guys. But I think just pump the brakes just a little bit, because I think there is a little bit more development to come, because that was not a great performance. But Patrick Mailata, and I said this when the fight was announced, that this was going to go rounds, because Milata is durable, but he's also quite skilled. People forget that he did win a bronze medal at the Commonwealth Games. He was a good amateur. And the other thing with his record, if you go check it out, and I've seen these other fights as well. So he had a very close fight with Kingsley eBay back in 2020. That was one of those bubble cards. Again, the weight was a bit of an issue. Is 284 pounds there. Remember, he's only 6'3", 6'4", and also the conditioning. And that in fights against eBay and then also against Antonio Moriles, and that was in 2023. He actually dropped Moriles, the 6'9" giant. He tired late in those fights, both those fights, and ultimately against eBay, it was a majority decision loss. Against Moriles, a split decision loss. And now we have a majority decision loss here. So there is a case to say that Milata, maybe with a little bit more luck, but also if he was in better shape with better conditioning, maybe he would actually still have the or perhaps just the one loss. So I think, the majority loss here, the majority decision win to Hovhannisyan is not unfair, and I scored this one a draw. But I think Milata, after he really went for it, so he was 309 pounds in this one, down from 321 pounds from his last fight, which was about 18 months ago. So he's too inactive, and he's not coming in the best of shape to really give himself the best opportunity to really perform. So it's a bit of a shame, because clearly there's something here, but based on these types of performances where he's giving really good work, I think there is, a solid, role that he can play in being a good litmus test for prospects coming up as a sort of, I don't want to say he's a journeyman at the stage, but you know what, he's entering that territory. I wouldn't mind seeing him up against the likes of a Richard Torres if they need to give Torres some rounds, because Torres, I don't think, is going to sort of just rip through Patrick Mailata in one round or anything like that. He'll have to work for it. But Gurgen Hovhannisyan, it's a win. He advanced to 7-0, but it's not exactly a great statement, or if anything, his stock, I think, drops a bit. I mean, Milata's stock probably creeps up a bit, but because he's been a relative non-factor, so inactive, Hovhannisyan, he was the guy that is seen as a bit of a blue-chip prospect. He's got the backing of trainer Joe Goosen in his corner. There are expectations that he's one of these next, half a dozen potential top guys in the next couple of years. Based on that, I thought he kind of looked relatively average. It wasn't the performance I was expecting. How about you? But we'll move on to Danier Pero. So he's had a pretty good 2024, and he's capped it off with a very impressive performance against Walter Burns. And it was effectively the first big left hand that he threw. So it wasn't quite a straight left hand. He just sort of rolled it around the side of the guard, and it absolutely decimated Burns. And if you saw it, he was trying to catch himself a little bit, but it was almost like he fell in slow motion. But after that, he didn't look quite right. He continued. Then there was a cut that was from a punch. And at one point, he turns to the referee. He didn't want to fight. It was checked, but then he continued. He said he did want to continue, and he was taking some shots. And you had Danier Pero, who was patient. He wasn't trying to get too crazy, because Burns was throwing the odd haymaker, trying to make something happen. Ultimately, the referee jumps in after he's caught with a big shot. I think it was a right hook, and then you had Burns sort of almost like a delayed reaction, and then he goes to throw a punch and is off balance and just flops onto the canvas. Referee checks him over and goes, "Nope, seen enough." So decent performance by Danier Pero, who picks up a WBA trinket, the WBA, was it Continental-Americas title. So he's already in their rankings. So I'm hoping for Pero's sake that we can actually see a bit more of him in 2025. But sometimes some of these fighters, especially the Cubans, and they don't speak English, they don't necessarily always get the opportunities, and they don't necessarily sell fights. They don't hype themselves up to boxing audiences. They're just doing their talking in the ring with their performances. So maybe he's got to look at some of the outside of the ring stuff that he could do to try to build his name and reputation a little bit more, because I don't think there'll be guys queuing up for him, because he did look good. So currently he is, 10-0 now, there or thereabouts. So Danier Pero, good performance to end the year. Look to see more of him in 2025. If you caught the fights, what did you make of them? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.